Good morning, everyone. Today on our podcast, we are going to be discussing the novel Farewell, My Lady by Raymond Chandler. This novel was written back in the 40s, featuring the hard-boiled detective Philip Marlowe, who tends to find himself in very sticky situations that he is forced to crawl his way out of, sometimes literally, to get to the bottom of his murder mystery. The characteristics of Marlowe and the author Chandler closely resemble one another. One of the main similarities between the two is their disease of alcoholism. Here's a little history on Chandler before we dive into the book. Raymond Chandler was born in 1888. He worked at an oil company until he was in his 40s when he was fired due to his alcoholism. And at this time is when he became a real quotation writer, except for a few poems that were published before then. Chandler was a severe alcoholic. He used his experience as an alcoholic to actually improve the flavor of his characters in his writings. This is seen reflected in the novel Farewell, My Lady, especially with the main character, which we will discuss later in the podcast. Now let's dive in. Farewell, My Lovely is a novel that is full of seduction and murder that whispers come and play. This story is not your typical hard-boiled murder mystery. It holds much more depth and weight in its expression through its characters. A story with a sharp dialogue and attitude that it could only be fitting for a pulp fiction paperback classic. First, let's take a look at the art of seduction that is displayed in this book. Even the cover of the book shows signs of seduction with the silhouette of a woman's legs and with cute, fancy shoes on the cover. This shows that there is more of a tale to tell than just murder mystery. The story begins with Marlowe and Moose Malone in a bar discussing Moose's obsession with a girl named Val. Excuse me, I had to cough there. What I was saying was was the obsession with Moose with the name Velma. Marlowe is utterly, I'm all over the place today. Moose, which they call Moose, is utterly obsessed with this woman, and he is willing to kill anyone who stands in the way of him finding her. Now, doesn't this make for a great love affair that is just beginning? There's a quote that I'd like to quote from the book, and here it goes. She gave me a smile that I could feel in my hip pocket, with smooth, shiny girls, hard-boiled and loaded in the air as cold as ashes of love. Obsession and desire are two of the main factors in the plot of this story. All characters seem to be driven by the lower natures of desire and obsession. Moose's obsession to find Velma so that he can satisfy his own desire of her to consume her. The detective Marlowe wants to find Velma to solve his own desire of mystery. Although there is no sex in the novel, chemistry is something that is seen many times between the different characters, one being the detective and the detective's daughter, Anne. They seem to have great chemistry between the two of them, which then brings about intrigue with the reader. Here's a spoiler alert, so if you haven't finished the story yet, please pause this section until you do. Mrs. Lockridge Grayle, who is later to be revealed as Velma, is dripping with sex appeal. She is a beautiful bombshell who not only is well-to-do, but also is able to derive the desire of every man that comes in contact with her. She is like the light for a moth to a flame. Second, I would like to discuss the alcoholism in this novel and how it affects the characters, but also how it holds up the plot. Alcoholism is something that was raging in the 30s and 40s. During this time, Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote his first book depicting the archetype of what a true alcoholic is. On page 30 of Alcoholics Anonymous, here's the definition of the alcoholic. Most of us are unwilling to admit that we are real alcoholic. No person likes to think he is mentally or bodily different than his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that their drinking career is categorized by countless vain attempts to prove that they can drink like other people. The idea that somehow, some way, he will control his drinking and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it to the gates of insanity or death. Comparing Merlot to the description of an alcoholic in the big books of Alcoholics Anonymous, he is a perfect fit. Throughout the novel, Merlot finds himself at the brink of insanity numerous times, and death for him is on the table every day. No normal person would live this lifestyle unless they were an alcoholic. After leaving the asylum and drying out for a few days, Merlot comes back to the bottle that is killing him slowly, almost immediately. Merlot does find purpose in solving mysteries, but as a whole, his life is in shambles. This is displayed by the settings of his office and his home, that is nothing more than dirty dishes and full ashtrays that represents the parallels in his life. Now, last but not least, we are going to discuss murder. I know that this is what everyone has been waiting for. Who doesn't love a good murder story? Murder mystery is probably one of the deepest desires of the dark shadow of all human nature. Everyone in this novel seems to get murdered but the two characters, Merlot and Velma, which Velma ends up going to jail, so her story ends tragically. The book goes on into graphic details of brains being splattered on the pavement and an old lady being strangled in her bed as she is sprawled out in a horrible graphic scene. The graphic images explained in this book are nothing short of almost a Stephen King novel. The death in this novel, I believe, is a byproduct of the deep desire of obsession that comes from unacquainted love. Death is, as it seems, a counterpart to the love gone wrong and the obsession that cannot be quenched. The different elements of obsession and seduction and alcoholism are what makes this novel a must-read. Before I end this session, I will leave you with this quote. And win, lose, or draw, who would pay the biggest? My goodness, I am so sorry. It is one of those days. Okay, I will start again. Win, lose, or draw, who would pay the biggest price for the show? An old man who has love not smart but all too well. Thank you very much for tuning in, and please tune in next week for our novel, The Red Harvest. If you would like to hear more of my podcast, please hit the subscribe button at the bottom, and I look forward to meeting you all here next week. Good luck and be safe.